What's going on, everyone? Likachu64 here, back with another video about Nintendo's history, and, well, their relation to their audience. So, I was thinking, I've been doing some research recently on generally the entire history of video games, and I find it incredibly fascinating. But what I find even more fascinating a lot of the times is Nintendo's audience, and how for a long time it seems like Nintendo has been more geared towards families. And I still think that they are to a degree, but what I want to discuss in this video is how I think that they have become slightly less kid friendly, if you will. I think that, I'm not to say that they're, just rock star now and they only make animated games. Far from it. I just think that they try to appeal to many more kinds of types of people, many different audiences. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. Let's discuss Nintendo's history for a moment. Since their creation, Nintendo, I believe, has really marketed a lot towards families and kids. Back in the late 70s, early 80s, they made games like Donkey Kong, Mario Bros. You don't need me to explain what games they made back then. But I feel like that was the story with almost every company back in the 80s. It didn't really seem like there was much of an adult interest in video games at that point yet, so there weren't very many adult-oriented games. Now, whenever things got pushed into the 90s with the release of the Super NES and Sega Genesis and whatnot, that's when the dividing line kind of hit, because the kids that had grown up playing NES and arcade were getting older now, and they wanted something a bit more mature, shall we say. Now, the big pivotal game here, of course, was Mortal Kombat. You've probably heard this a billion times if you've done your research, but Mortal Kombat was basically the entire reason that the ESRB, the Electronic Software Rating Board, was created, due to its substantial amount of violence. Now, here's the difference, is that Nintendo, in their version of the game, they removed the blood nearly entirely and replaced it with green sweat, if you will. Now again, Mortal Kombat came out before the ESRB was put in place, but 2 years after Mortal Kombat was released, the ESRB, there was a lot of concerns about it. Parents were very concerned about their kids playing violent video games, and that's what tipped it over the edge. That's what caused the ESRB to be created, and Mortal Kombat was giving the very first M-rated game rating. But the thing was that I think that this was the first time that Nintendo kind of got some flack for trying to aim for a more kid-friendly audience. I know that some more mature gamers of the time were kind of upset at Nintendo for removing the blood. Like, why would you do that? Censorship? What? That doesn't make any sense. Now, in terms of censorship as well, there were some Final Fantasy games that also in Japan, they showed some things that in America would not very much be accepted. So Nintendo, they approached Square Enix about it whenever they were porting it over to America, and they censored a few of the things in their Final Fantasy games. All good and well. I mean, I think Japan is in many ways much more tolerant of some things than us Americans are. Now, moving into the N64 era, late 90s, early 2000s, I think that this was still the case, but maybe less so, I suppose. You have games like GoldenEye 007, which arguably maybe that wasn't entirely M-rated per se, but you also have games like Conker's Bad Fur Day, which, if you've never heard of, was a game made by Rare, which at the time Rare was working with Nintendo very, very closely. It looked very similar to Banjo-Kazooie and Donkey Kong 64, two of their other games, in visual style, but in terms of family-friendly content, it was nowhere near. Conker, the main hero of the story, was a alcoholic. There was graphic violence, a lot of stuff like that. Nintendo didn't market it very much, but they allowed it to be released nonetheless. Now, I think that that's the only outlier I can picture in the N64's life cycle, though. I mean, everything else, Mario 64, Ocarina of Time, all of that stuff was very, very family friendly. Now moving into GameCube, there were a lot of third-party games that also came to Nintendo platforms that were more or less just M-rated. There's not more or less; they were M-rated. And then moving into the Wii cycle, um, I suppose Nintendo they partnered up with, what is it, Monolith Soft? No, excuse my ignorance, but they made Bayonetta, which essentially, I mean, in many ways, is their first real and mature game. Um, Now, despite those, again, I would call them outliers. The Wii and GameCube era were very much family friendly. Um, Now, Wii U. I think that Wii U, uh, the, the Wii U's life cycle just ended about a year ago at this point. They really, really pushed the family friendly side of it. Like, if you look at any one of the advertisements for the Wii U, every single one has a kid in it. Every single one has families in it, and that's largely how they marketed the console. Sure, you had things like Assassin's Creed Black Flag, Zombie U, few other M-rated games, but for the most part, it was a very, very family-friendly console. So you have this history of Nintendo being that family friendly publisher, that family friendly game console maker, whereas Xbox and PlayStation were the ones that offered more mature experiences, I suppose. Um, you have those 30 years, and I mean, obviously, that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think you look at any Mario game, Super Mario Odyssey, which came out recently, obviously kids and adults can enjoy those games just the same. In my opinion, in my taste, I actually really like the family friendly, kid oriented games. They just feel more lighthearted to me. Whenever I go to play my video games, I like to be hugged by them, not blown up in the face. But hey, that's just again my personal taste of video games. Now, that brings us to the present, though. The Nintendo Switch. I think that Nintendo has really turned it around. Quite honestly, um, especially from the Wii U, where the Wii U was just fully embracing the family-friendly side of it. Just the play this with your kids, kids. That was the marketing behind the entire Wii U's life cycle. The Switch, they've changed things up a little bit. Now, what they're doing is marketing to young adults, which is very, very smart. Like, I I really admire the marketing that they've been doing so far with the Switch. But not just the marketing. If you look at a few of the games that have come out just in the past couple weeks, and some that will be coming out next year, we got LA Noire, Skyrim, Doom, Wolfenstein 2 is coming next year. Some very, very popular M-rated games that Bethesda made two of them. Rockstar made one. Sorry, Bethesda made three of them. Yeah, Bethesda made three of them. Rockstar made one. I believe I believe that we can only see more to come. So sum it all up to say that I think that with the Switch, Nintendo has really kind of changed their standpoint. They're not only marketing towards kids because a lot of their games are kid friendly, but they're also marketing towards young adults and releasing games that will really appeal to young adults. Not only in terms of M-rated games, there's also plenty of T-rated games that have come out to the Switch. Some smaller indie titles, as well as Xenoblade 2, Fire Emblem Warriors, games like those. And I think that's really exciting. You know, the more audiences that you have, the less limited you are in terms of who's going to be playing your console. If they just made M-rated games, they never would. They're Nintendo. But if they did, then I mean, what kid you are missing out on an entire generation of kids who wouldn't do that, who wouldn't play those simply because they're just too over their heads. If you just released games oriented towards kids, then you would have a lot of You would miss out on another generation that would go for those M-rated games, but not for the E10 plus rated games. So, anyways, guys, what do you think? Do you think that Nintendo has changed their viewpoints like I do, or do you think that they're still, despite the fact that there are some M-rated games coming to the Switch, do you think that the fact that most of the games are E10 plus means that no, they're still family friendly Nintendo? Let me know down in the comments. And hey, if you're new to the channel, I'm Linkature64. I talk about everything Nintendo, Nintendo Switch, Nintendo's future, marketing, all that awesome stuff. And if you're interested, make sure you subscribe so you can catch more of my videos and content coming in the future. And make sure you go over to my Instagram, Linkachu_64, to catch more news and updates and whatnot there. So, anyways, guys, what are you still doing here?